Welcome back to the Weekly Huddle YouTube channel. I'm your host, Owen, and today I'm joined by Randall Slifer, or is it Slifer or Silver? I always get that mixed up because the I and the L is so close. Slifer, got it. Okay, I remember that. I was a big Yu-Gi-Oh kid when I was growing up, so Slifer, the Sky Dragon, was a card. I'll use that to remember it now. But so here with Randall Slifer, he was a draft professor alongside me over at the Draft Fanatics YouTube channel, Draft Professor YouTube channel, Draft Fanatics on Twitter. And as well as he's a writer for Team NBS, where he covers the Bills, Arkansas Razorbacks, and overall just talks about sports in general over there. So how are we doing, Randall?
I'm doing great. It is Friday. Love talking Buffalo Bills. So Friday night, talking Buffalo Bills is a great start. How you doing?
Good, yeah. I think every time we've talked so far has been about the Bills. We did the pre-epic mock draft stuff with the draft professor, and we did a couple episodes over there. Just most recently, this past Thursday, talking about the Bills and kind of their roster projections moving forward, what their draft needs are going to be. And that kind of bleeds over into what we're going to talk about today, where this is going to be part draft class reaction to who the Bills picked, and we're talking about how we like the players themselves specifically, as well as I have catered questions to each individual player and how they will impact the 53-man roster in 2025-26, as well as moving forward, because some of these guys are going to be some more long-term projections and how that's going to shape the roster. And we both know how Brandon Beane likes to think 3-4 seasons down in the future with some of these picks. So I think some of these will be eligible for that kind of later down the road blossoming into a starter type player. So I'm excited to talk about it. I really like the draft class as an overall. What's your overall opinion of this class?
Honestly, an A for me. To be honest, a lot of this draft kind of flowed kind of how I expected it to be honest with you. There was a lot of chatter with wide receiver and stuff like that, things along those lines, but we all knew that our most important thing was defensive tackle, edge, and quarterback. That's what we went with the first three rounds. And then I do believe that Brandon Beane was more of a BPA from then on out. I might not believe that in day one and day two, but I did believe day three was more of a BPA day.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of the players he ended up landing even on day three, I was a big fan of. I also think it's pushing towards an A draft there. I saw today someone gave it like a C or like a C minus. I think mostly because it was carried by the fact that they didn't think Maxwell Harrison was because they also said like the biggest reach on a player was Maxwell Harrison. So I think in their opinion, he wasn't close to a day one player. And that may be what's dragging it down for them, because they said they liked the rest of the draft. It was just kind of the first round that brought it down. I was a big Harrison fan. We can parlay that now into the first pick, Maxwell Harrison, cornerback out of Kentucky. I was a big Harrison fan. He made all my guys team as an outside corner. I didn't think he was going to be a first round pick. I know there was a ton of buzz after he ran the sub 4.3 40 at the combine, but there was some other stuff about how he had a sexual assault allegation in high school, and there was some other just like tackling issues with his shoulder injury and his size. There were a bunch of question marks that I thought. That's why I ended up putting him on my guys list, is that I thought maybe he was being slept on a little too much. But he ends up going in the first. Regardless, I still like him in that spot for the Bills.
No, I definitely agree 100%. And then when you look at like where the consensus of cornerbacks were going and who were falling, Maxwell Harrison always stayed in that, especially after the combine, that late first round, early second round. And then it was paired with Trey Amos and Azariah Thomas as well. But Amos and Thomas ended up falling much further back while Harrison stayed in that first round. So I think that says a lot about who he was and how he responded to NFL teams and workouts and interviews and things along the line. So that's what I kind of love about it, is he still stuck out as that number one option when it came to the late first round. But I do love him too. I mean, yeah, we could talk about his tackling, and then you can look at the 2024 tape with his shoulder injury, so that doesn't really count. There was some, shoulder tackling in 2023, but for Bills fans, it shouldn't really be much of a PTSD from Kyer Elam. I think in Florida, he kind of avoided tackling, while Maxwell Harrison was going more towards, willing tackler and just needs to learn more technique. But I think the 4.29 kept him in the first round because I think he's great in zone, and that 4.29 means that he can run with any wide receiver and man.
Yeah, I think especially that explosiveness from his running and his jumping showed up when he was closing those gaps in zone coverage. So I really liked that. As he had awesome zone instincts, but he's also able to play with a little more cushion in route and then bait throws in more. You saw him, he had like 5 interceptions in 2023, with 3 of them being pick sixes, 1 pick in 2024, also a pick six. So he's able to bait these kind of big throws, especially on outcutting routes, and capitalize on those throws that some of these quarterbacks maybe aren't able to make, especially at the college level. So the question I have for Hairston, so we added Trey White this offseason as well as Dane Jackson. I'm going to focus more on the Trey White signing as it comes to Hairston. I think for me, what that tells me is that they're hoping Trey White is either in contention or wins the starting job. He ramped up and was doing better as a Baltimore Raven at the end of last season. And with Maxwell Hairston coming in, he's allegedly up to 190 plus now after being 170 in Kentucky. I'm thinking they wanted to hedge their bets by bringing a guy they knows the system, who's a character type player, and can mentor this younger player up while he's transitioning with his body, understanding how to play a little bit more with some more mass, and as well as learning the system overall, coming in and being this more heavy communication system, as well as a system that's maybe adding some more man coverage elements into it with the Bills secondary. So for me, is there a point where you think, do you think Trey White, I don't think he's a cut candidate this season just from his contract standpoint is, do you think you would be comfortable with him starting and then Hairston slowly generating, feeding into those touches, or are you more so if Hairston wins the job outright, he wins the job outright?
I would say if he wins the job outright, he wins the job outright. I think in the past 2 years, we've seen Brandon Beane become more lenient in rookies playing more snaps. Obviously, pre-2021, it was very heavy. He even went on the podium saying that only first-round rookies are the ones who start, and then the rest are depth. But as a cornerback, it is tough to transition in the NFL, understanding the speed and switching over to the new playbook. So I would think that right now they have penciled in Tre'Davious White as a starter, hoping Maxwell Hairston takes that spot. And I think Tre'Davious White's pretty much okay with that. And then kind of a little bit of the odd person out would be the competition in Dane Jackson in the back with Jamarcus Ingram and stuff like that. So I think it comes down to Maxwell Hairston proving himself and penciled in Tre'Davious White to start.
Do you think so? Trey White obviously he was a good coverage player for us, but he was never really a core special teamer. Never had to be. He contributed as a starter during his time with the Bills. Whereas guys you mentioned with Dane Jackson and Jamarcus Ingram can chip in on that special teams element. If Trey White doesn't win that job outright from camp, do you see a world where they don't feel like he offers much value as like a true backup, so they end up moving on from him and keeping on more corners that have special teams flexibility and just eating the higher cap hit? Or do you think even if he doesn't win, they'll still have him along just to be kind of in the mentor role or there in case of injury?
I think that they will hold on to him based on the leadership role and the mentoring role for sure when it comes down. If you have Tre'Davious White, Dane Jackson along those lines, and obviously Christian Benford on that other side, he is getting older to the age for that leadership, so he can continue as well. But I do think that Tre'Davious White, I really did like the Ravens' final games and what he did. So I think he's capable, and I think he has the highest floor as a backup cornerback. So I think Brandon Beane will more focus on who has the higher floor as the backup cornerback instead of special teams quality, especially when you look at the Kansas City game, what happened with Kaiir Elam being in the back of the depth chart and Christian Benford going out. So I think they'll go with more cornerback talent than versatility for that backup role specifically.
All right, yeah, that's I felt the same way. I felt like Tre'Davious White's probably a lock for the roster. I was just curious because since there's that element of both the Hairston and Trey White, you don't particularly want them being like, those role-playing backup special teamers. If there was going to be some way they push Trey White out even with the contract they did give him. So I'm glad we're in step with that. So next up we had pick 41 overall, second round pick. We have TJ Sanders, D-tackle out of South Carolina. He was. This is a bit rich for what I liked for him. I had him as like a high third round grade, which when stacking up the board based on how kind of weak the top of the draft class was, I'm sure is still within the top 64 players on my board. I haven't gone back to double check. But even then, if you swap him with our third round pick, Landon Jackson, I'd be comfortable with that as well. So I'm not upset with this pick. TJ is just going to be kind of the D-tackle archetype I didn't think they were going to pursue. I think it says a lot about what they're looking at when it comes to how they want to run their fronts and the type of athletes they want and how they're going to employ, especially on passing downs. My question for you is, with TJ Sanders he weighed in sub 300 pounds at the combine. I heard somewhere today that he was weighing up to 305 at this point with how the Bills announced it. I'm not sure if you heard that or if you know where that source is coming from, but with him being more of that Ed Oliver sub 300 pound type rushing D tackle, does this mean a lot for Dwayne Carter being more pegged as that one tech player? And how do you feel about him playing in that role alongside them? Because I didn't really foresee that at least with his first season.
Yeah, the TJ Sanders, and I agree with you, like flip Landon Jackson, TJ Sanders is pretty much, nobody would kind of balk at that sort of thing. And we still got our third rounder while we traded the second round. So like the trade was not egregious and they went and got their guy. But my question would be, because like I really do like TJ Sanders. I did my rewatch previously. I was skeptical because I had a late third on him. So I didn't want to spend pick 62 on him. But then there was rumors that TJ Sanders was coveted in the mid 40s. So that's why they traded up. So I'll trust the NFL on that. And then I rewatched him. To be honest, there are a lot of games where TJ Sanders, his versatility shows. And I believe you are right. He was in at 305. Even post the draft, he said he could weigh up to 309 if they needed to. So that's an availability. But like the Texas Tech game, he came a lot at the zero tech. He ended up with a sack, a QB hit, and a couple pressures sort of thing. And what makes him so versatile is his explosion and his lateral movement. And when he's at that zero tech, that lateral movement and speed kind of beats him with speed and lateral movement quickly on that center or guard, and you can get through him. So his versatility, Brandon Beane, I think, might use more than we kind of expect than just coming out as a 3 tech. And then when it comes to Dwayne Carter, I think that just kind of puts him on a hot seat. And then this year is his prove it to stay, especially with Dion. We'll talk about Dion later and stuff like that. But we heavily invested on the defensive line this year. So now it is put up or shut up. The trenches are filled with competition on both sides. So I would say it's more of an indictment on Dwayne Carter in his rookie year. I know he had an injury, but now Brandon Beane's more or less like, we don't have much more time. We accelerated our rebuild because we went to the AFC Championship last year. So I need the best guys. I can't depend on you to develop, sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm not super comfortable. Like I understand the Bills. This is how they want to run their defensive front. They want to have some undersized guys who have the explosiveness even at 1 tech. And I was accepting of that to a certain point, like 310, 315. Your Derek Carmans, your Darius Alexanders from his last class, for example. Daquan Jones played between 310 and 320 all of last season. So it's the style of player that I kind of anticipated them going after. And the fact that they landed TJ Sanders as like their marquee D tackle means that either, like you were saying, he's either going to have to use some of the versatility shown in college to play the 1 tech, or it's going to be Dwayne Carter, who I like less than TJ Sanders and even at 1 tech. So it becomes more of like you run small in the D tackles, you run small at linebacker. You have to really hope your team is kind of on top of it. You don't really have a lot of those traffic jammers up front to help free up space for or to keep the linebackers clean. So I've been curious to see how that impacts them when it comes to how they handle their fronts, especially against the run games, and if they have any specific packages or plans for when TJ and Ed are on the field at the same time.
No, I definitely agree. It'll be interesting to see because it doesn't mean it's going to work. That's like the one question mark, right? Is it going to work, sort of thing, in his strategy on how he attacked this draft and what our defensive line looks like for the offseason with Michael Hoyt and his versatility, Ogunjobi and Bosa, sort of thing. So I'm curious because now they're kind of bigger on the edge with Landon Jackson being 265, Greg Rousseau being the tall, lengthy guy. Joey Bosa a little bit on the heavier side to be able to set the edge on one side. So it's curious to see how he attacks it and how many different combinations he's going to use is probably what we'll start to notice in the first 4 games.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly what you said. That's why I was drooling about the idea of the Bills landing like a Michael Williams this draft here.
Yes.
In the first round. That would have been amazing just to pair with that. But sticking with the edge rushers, we ended up getting a player that I was in my top 32. He was a top 32 grade for me. I was a big Landon Jackson guy. So Landon Jackson, the edge rusher out of Arkansas, like you were saying, 6'6", 265, big guy. Showed surprising. I don't think it's so much in his hips, but he had some good ankle flexion for me, so he's a little bendier than you expect for a guy with that level of pad height, and who plays with such length and power in his hands. I think he needs to develop as a pass rusher. He doesn't really have a lot of pass rushing moves or ways to attack consistently right now, but he does weaponize his length good. He does have heavy hands. He has sneaky good athleticism for that frame. Obviously, he was a 9+ RES player, so he's not like sneaky good at an athlete. We know how good he is, but I think if I asked you what kind of athlete you'd think you'd be, it wouldn't really be that. So how do you feel about the Landon Jackson pick? I know you're a big Arkansas guy.
Right. Yeah. So I love it as, bias and everything. I should be able to find a cheap jersey so I can wear that into Highmark Stadium. But I do love him. I mean, I think he's that perfect depth piece to start in 2025 to where his athleticism is going to wear people out as a rotational guy. You put in Greg Rousseau. He played on both sides at Arkansas. So you put in Greg Rousseau and he attacks on first and second down. Landon Jackson might come in on third down. Like, that's even an upgrade in athleticism if he's sitting behind Rousseau to come out. So those tackles are just getting worn out and worn out and worn out. But I agree. I mean, he's a great run defender right now. So he's coming into 2025 as a good setting the edge, can defend the run really well, and then he can learn his pass rush. And it's not inexistent because he had a 7-sack season, 2 7-sack seasons, I believe, and then hit 13 quarterback hits in the last 2 years. So it's not inexistent. You're right about the ankle flexibility there. And then he just has to learn a couple. Cross chops is number one. If he could do a good, kind of learn more of a better speed to power, use bull rush more and a couple inside moves, then he's pretty good to go. But, I mean, if we're looking, I know that Brandon Beane kind of looked in 2 years, in 2023 and 2024. And Landon Jackson 4-sack game against, Caden Proctor and Tyler Booker in 2023 was impressive. And those are impressive offensive linemen. So he can do it. And I think that his hope to come to Buffalo is also a good positive as he's going to come here and, give it 100% of his effort.
So the roster question I have with the Landon Jackson pick is going to be the impact it has on the edge room, and specifically with AJ Epinesa, which I think has been the big question coming out of this draft with that pick. And Epinesa is safe outside of a trade option, the way I understand the way the contract is set up at the moment. And the way people are looking at it is that they brought in Landon Jackson so that way next offseason they can move on from Epinesa and not have to, unless he comes back in a very team-friendly, cheap deal, not have to worry about investing any money bringing him back. For me, my question is, do you see a future where now they have Hoyt, they have Rousseau, Solomon, and now Jackson would be their four? This team often, we did the roster breakdown. I think on average they keep between 4 and 5 defensive ends, and they've been leaning more heavily on the 5 side of that in recent years. Do you think there's a future where Landon Jackson develops into more of the starting player? Like most people see him as that AJ Epinesa archetype, and he's going to take over the exact same role AJ Epinesa does. I think he's a better athlete and can grow into a better player than Epinesa has the ceiling to be right now. I think Epinesa's at his ceiling as like a 3rd or 4th rotational pass rusher who's strong against the run. I think Landon Jackson's already at that point in his career with the run defense and that he has a higher ceiling. So do you think that there is a pathway for Epinesa to come back to this team next year while Landon Jackson's still on the team, then have Jackson or Hoyt be the starter and then the other one rotate in as well as with Epinesa, and you have now turn your edge room into more of a strength? And at that point, Epinesa, if he doesn't find an opportunity somewhere else, is back on a cheaper contract.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much exactly where I'm at the moment, to be honest. I expect Landon Jackson to take a starting role. I think his athleticism and his talent and his work mentality will lead him to a starting role, and then being able to have those 2 lengthy guys on the side, Rousseau and Landon Jackson on both sides, I think is devastating and incredible. So I'm on your side where I do think AJ Epinesa probably will do kind of the Brandon Beane thing where, hey, go see your market, see where it's at. Let's get back to this. We'd love to have you back, but we'll try and either match it or we'll have a conversation after you test the market. And then I think the most important thing it comes down to is Javon Solomon. Last year was not too much of a big contributor. He's a technician. He's a 3rd down specialist sort of thing. So what does Javon Solomon look like this year opens up where our edge room is going to go in 2026.
Yeah, I think if you don't have to bring Epinesa back, I don't think they won't force it. But I do think he's in that same crop as probably in the future Gabe Davis. I could see it with Matt Milano as well. Players in the same bucket as like Trey White, Jordan Phillips, players that end up finding their way back to the Bills because that's where they find their most success and have their most useful career seasons as well as just being utilized the best. I could definitely see AJ Epinesa falling into that bucket as well. So I was curious. And also one last question on Landon Jackson, since you are intimately familiar with Arkansas. Can you enlighten me a bit on the neck injury he had? I didn't really know about that. I knew he missed the end of the season, but it got brought up to me by Jim over at the Draft Fanatic, and he asked me about the neck injury, and I wasn't really that privy to it. I don't know if you being captain with Arkansas, if you knew anything else beyond that.
Yeah, fortunately, it wasn't much of anything at that point. It was the Missouri game. I believe it was the final season game, and it was actually snowing in Missouri, like for the first time of the year, sort of thing. So it was slippery, but he was in the Missouri game, came out, tweaked his neck, and then he was laying on the sideline. He was alert at all times, and then they played caution, put him on a stretcher, took him to the hospital and kept him overnight. But he was alert, moved all extremities, and they kept him overnight as a precaution. They said they could have dismissed him that day, but they just decided to keep him overnight. So it was full precautionary to make sure, because neck injuries are so scary. So it was all full precautionary. He was dismissed, and then nothing along those lines. Doctors gave him full green light. That's about it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I just wasn't familiar with the fact that, because I knew he missed the last game for the majority of it, and I didn't understand what the issue was, and I'm sure it was precautionary because it was the last game. He was going into the draft after that. I'm sure it was really just being, like you said, precautionary. So good. I was a bit concerned, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be anything that's going to be holding him back at any point in the NFL.
0%.
Now, talking about injuries that can hold someone back, at least early on, we know for a fact in the spring practice this player is going to be held back. Is going to be Deion Walker, the 4th-round pick. Trade up to get him at 109, D-tackle out of Kentucky. 6'7", 340, around there. Massive human being.
Massive.
Apparently played all of last season with a lower back injury. Now, there was flashes. I did like some of the tape, especially with how someone that level of size, who has that twitch, has the ability to get off, get explosive, and do things that you often see in smaller players. And you look at the size and the skill set, and you're like, okay, we can have him play up to his size while still maintaining some of these smaller player tendencies and abilities, then you have something special there. It was just that you didn't really see a lot of the big man stuff that you would want to see from a player of that size. So I was a bit cautious on this. I'm hoping that because the Bills already have a rotation of Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Dwayne Carter, TJ Sanders now, that Deion is going to be brought along a little bit slower and heal fully up from that lower back injury, which is going to impact tall dudes like that severely, so even more so than anybody else that you'd expect. So for me, how do you like the Deion Walker pick? I know it's a bit polarizing in the Bills community.
Yeah, I actually love Deion Walker. He was, I think, my first defensive tackle that I summer scouted back in October. So I kind of fell in love with him. And then shout out to Accidental Zen. He kept my love for him because Will was such a big fan as well. But I'm a big Deion Walker fan. I did some quick research because it kind of clicked in my head today. You know, Derek Harmon this year was so prolific, got drafted 21st in the first round. And he took that big jump at Oregon in 2024, and everybody loved his pressure rate. He had 55 pressures, 5 sacks, 7 QB hits, pass rush win rate of 16%. Similar to, kind of how they hold their weight. Deion Walker has a little bit more, but in 2023, Brandon Beane talked about, we want 2023 Deion Walker because without the back injury and thing, he had 51 pressures, 8 sacks, 4 QB hits, a pass rush win rate at 12%. So we're comparing similar numbers in that aspect, as well as Derek Harmon taking about 10% more outside at 5-eye or 7-eye to Deion Walker in 2023, where he was attacking the A gap 16 to 20% and the B gap about 55%. So he was gaining 51 pressures more on the interior than Derek Harmon was. And that's what kind of excited me a little bit when it came down to what Deion Walker was in 2023. I know his back injury is something that fully heals 100%, and there's a good chance that it does not come back. It takes about 6 to 8 months to heal. So I know that there is chatter about full year IR, which I think would be okay, to be honest with you. I think Deion Walker might like that. I think the Bills organization might like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was just a first 4-week IR and then bring him in week 5 and then get him acclimated, because I do think that he could get to 100% by week 5. But the question is, where are you? Like, how is your recovery?
Yeah, so that kind of bleeds into the question I had with Deion Walker, was the fact that his back injury, they already said they're going to keep him out of this spring rookie ball and voluntary OTAs in the spring and allow him to rest and be ready to go, quote unquote,
right,
for the summer training camp and leading up to the preseason. If that's the case, it sounds like he's pretty much on the road to recovery to be ready for the start of the season. But this is a team that, again, we discussed on yesterday's podcast over at the Draft Professor about how this team structures their rosters. And I did a breakdown of the last 5 years of roster management. And after the 53-man cuts, the beginning of that season, they oftentimes, on average, had 4.3 D tackles. So more towards 4 than anything else. I think they had 5 maybe 1 or 2 seasons. So with that in mind, you already have 4 in on your roster that you want that are going to make the team: and Dwayne Carter, TJ Sanders, and Oliver Daquan Jones. And then you have Larry Ogunjobi coming off of suspension at week 6, who he doesn't count against the roster when the cuts have to be made. He's considered injured, or however the similarity is to that. So you don't have to make any roster adjustments to get him on the team. You'll just have to make one when he becomes available. So for me, we're already at 4. Ogunjobi is going to return in week 6. And so now you're at 5, and then Dale Walker makes 6. So you're going from a team that oftentimes keeps 40 tackles and will sometimes elevate guys on the practice squad or maybe have a 5th there for rotational purposes, but oftentimes doesn't really load that position with bodies. And now you have 2 guys that maybe Deion Walker goes on the IR, maybe for the year long, maybe for the first 4 weeks, like you said. Ogunjobi's coming back. How do you think they manage that position, and what is your prediction for how many players are on that roster or in that position on the roster if you include Deion Walker, the 4 other ones, and Larry Ogunjobi as an example player?
Yeah, that's super tough, especially for his back injury sort of thing. So if they do keep him out 4 weeks, like then you kind of balance. Do you just roll out once week 7 hits with Hoyt and Ogunjobi? It's tough. I do think they'll run 5 just to kind of figure it out. There's so many brand new guys that you just kind of have to maybe plug and play and figure out a little bit, especially during the offseason, things along those lines. It's tough. I think they'll run 5. I think Ogunjobi could be a practice squad candidate depending on how things kind of unfold. But the issue is, the good thing about it is that you have 6 weeks to kind of figure it out. So if we're struggling, then you bring in you have Ogunjobi and you're like, okay, thank you. You can come in. We'll send somebody back or kind of figure that out. That's probably the hardest. The trenches are probably the hardest to figure out because we have so much talent on both sides that you kind of just have a clean competition to figure it out. I would think we run 5. When Brandon Beane talked about just keeping him out in spring and then getting ready for the regular season, lean me towards him maybe just taking the 4-week IR and then running him for the whole rookie year, especially with a trade up to 109 for him. I would guess that Ogunjobi could be. He was just on a 1-year deal. He could be out of the mix. He was the case to where his suspension came right as the week they were signing him, while Hoyt was identified before we signed him and still gave him the contract. But Ogunjobi was the same exact week we decided to sign him, so that was more of a surprise. So I wonder if that plays a part in his availability post his suspension.
Yeah, I felt so. I didn't know what the realistic opportunity was when it came to cutting him or practice squatting him like you were talking about. I mean, I guess at that point in the season, if your 5-man rotation is performing well enough, you don't have to worry about that. And even if he gets cut and claimed by somebody else, then at that point, oh well. Or if they hold on to Walker up until Ogunjobi comes back and then place him on IR post that, if like his back is still bothering him, they can fudge some stuff and get him off the roster that way. I'm curious to see how that plays out, and that's going to be when we find out rather quickly, because especially if they do run 5, including Walker, out of practice or out of the spring or out of training camp, then you'll be able to learn that once week 6 goes around with Ogunjobi's suspension being up.
Yeah, you never know too when it comes down to Deion Walker. His weight, he's at 340, and he will probably just be coming back at 100. Like if Brandon Beane, if he's going to play week 1 or week 5, and he didn't have much off-season workouts, then they might put him at a 15 to 20% snap share and just kind of get a feel for the NFL. Don't do much, even though you're 100%. Just get a feel for it. Ogunjobi comes back, you put him on IR for a little bit, so then he can kind of rest back up, get back to 100%, not stress him out, and then maybe reevaluate at week 10, something like that. I guess there's options.
Yeah, and it can get kind of confusing. That's the one you'd hope they have an internal plan at this point when they made that double dip pick to understand what their plan of attack for that was going to be. We're getting into we were already in day 3 with the 4th round pick there, but I'm sorry. But we're getting into round 5 now. That's what I meant to say. With one of my favorite picks, another one of the players that ended up on my guys' list is Jordan Hancock. I think he's a safety out of Ohio State, slot corner, safety type, played outside corner Ohio State. For me, I loved him when he was able to keep stuff in front of him and then play downhill and attack on the catch points. where he got in trouble was when he was forced to play outside corner, be more of a man guy for Ohio State. Super athletic. It just wasn't super technically refined or able to process the position that well. So I'm glad that he's brought in. And this is where I'll let you get into how you feel about the prospect real quick. But this is going to be a similar player to what you've got currently in like Cam Lewis in my eyes. And that's been a common conception for most Bills fans. So 100%. How do you feel about Hancock?
Yeah, 100%. I love Jordan Hancock. I could not believe he was there at pick 170. Talk about value. Like, past this, we got all value, guys, in my opinion. But he was great value, and you're right. He is more of that nickel safety. He will take that Cam Lewis spot. And I kind of love that, especially with Taron Johnson, because he plays with his hair on fire at all times. And does get injured at some points. So having a reliable backup, I do like Cam Lewis, but I think he's a little bit of the non-physical, while Jordan Hancock is much more physical than Cam Lewis. So he can come in and step in and take over that spot without much. Well, obviously a dip because Taron Johnson's an incredible person. But he can learn through Taron Johnson. And one of my favorite things, other than what you mentioned about Jordan Hancock, is his ability to absorb physical contact and keep with his guy. And that, I think that's going to transition super well with the NFL in covering tight ends. I think he will take a job in covering those big tight ends. I watched the Penn State game once we drafted him. And when he covered Tyler Warren, Tyler Warren did not have a single catch, single yard against him. And every single time, Tyler Warren would just go right into his chest and try to bounce off him to gain separation. Zero separation on that. So I think his ability to cover bigger and more prolific tight ends is what's going to be really valuable in the NFL.
Yeah, so just to go to your point of how Hancock's basically bigger, faster version of Cam Lewis. Cam Lewis is measured at 5'9", 183. And while Jordan Hancock is 6 foot 195, more of that. I think Cam Lewis is more of that slot corner build, whereas Hancock's more of that bigger safety build, big nickel type player that the Bills obviously have shown that they loved. The roster question I have with you with this, and we're sticking with the Cam Lewis conversation, is there a pathway you can see that both Lewis and Hancock make the roster? Because Hancock and Lewis, like Lewis has been a proven, consistent special teams player for the Bills, and they obviously love him. This past year and for these past few seasons, Hancock is probably the better ceilinged player for the same position on defense, but maybe more, like I just was saying, more safety than corner, whereas Lewis is more corner than safety. And he can, Hancock, that is, can also play team. So if you're trying to stack your team with as much versatility and flexibility in the back end, while also building the best special teams you can, having a player like Hancock and Lewis on your team, I feel like makes sense, whereas a lot of people are thinking like it's going to be a camp battle. Whoever wins it is on the team. Whoever loses it is cut, and it probably spells the end for Cam Lewis in Buffalo. Whereas I think there's a potential to potentially have them both on the roster moving forward. I just wanted to hear your thoughts and opinions on that.
So I think it'll be a tough path personally for Cam Lewis to stay on. I think he's going to have to compete a little bit for a cornerback role instead of that backup nickel safety role, especially because we signed Damar Hamlin in the safety department, Taylor Rapp still on. Then you have Cole Bishop, and then you have Derek Forrest as kind of our only free safety. So I think for Cam Lewis, he would have to almost compete for a cornerback job to keep that special teams and work from there, and then have his special teams kind of influence it. But with Jordan Hancock's availability in special teams and his athleticism combined with that, I think we may have to find it in a different way. So as much as I would love to keep Cam Lewis because he is a big Buffalo guy and the Buffalo loves him, I think he might lose out on a position and potentially be on practice squad.
Okay, that makes sense. I think he definitely could land on the practice squad. His skill set is very scheme specific, and the Bills are one of those teams that, has that role built into their defense. And he played at UB. The team obviously trusts him. He'd probably be a consistent elevation player if he wasn't the practice squad. So I could definitely see him if he's able to make it through cuts, which I don't think would be that difficult of a player to get through the waiver wire, landing him back in the practice squad. I could definitely see that. Moving on to their second fifth-round pick, only 3 spots later, and this is the last. So I did a video before the draft of my guys. That's what I keep referring back to, all my guys team, where I built a starting 11 offense and defense, while players I either was higher on in consensus, or I was going to bet the farm would succeed on the NFL players. And so the two we've talked about previously were Maxwell Harrison and now Jordan Hancock. And the final player that the Bills drafted that was on that team, long listed, were a couple other players that they drafted I had considered. But the last actual player that was on that team I built was Jackson Hawes, the tight end out of Georgia Tech. Player the Bills drafted 173rd overall. I was surprised he was still available in the 5th. I thought he was going to be an early round 4 player. For me, absolute just warrior, butt kicker to blocker, both in space and on the line of scrimmage. Like, you can line him up as your traditional tight end. He can be like kind of the sniffer tight end, be out wide. What I am super excited to see is him as the point of attack blocker on like those Khalil Shakir quick wide receiver screens on the boundary. There's a ton of stuff I think they can do with Hawes as their primary blocking tight end. And the fact that he can be tight end 3, and if Kincaid gets hurt, Knox slides into that more receiving role. He slides into the Knox blocking role, or if Knox gets hurt, he just slides into that role while Kincaid keeps up as a receiver. There's so much complementary with the tight end room that Hawes is going to be able to find a role really early on. A player I think may become the fan favorite of this draft class, or at least earlier on, because he's going to have so many standout moments that people are gonna appreciate. So, how do you view Jackson Hawes and his role on this team?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it. That's the one thing I did think about is all our small average depth of target throws to Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, and things like that. You got a blocker, like a true blocker. Matt Collins was a great blocker, and it's unfortunate that we lost him. But he was also a good X receiver and a vertical threat, so he had that option. Jackson Hawes obviously will have to develop into more of a pass catcher throughout his NFL, but his blocking will be so noted that he'll just kind of crush people. But I mean, Jackson Hawes and Dawson Knox's jobs when they were in college were eerily similar when it came to how much they blocked, what their main role was, and how much receiving end they got, sort of thing. And pass blocking was similar, run blocking and things along those lines. So there's somebody, Dawson Knox is in that room and that can develop Jackson Hawes into a pass catcher and help him gain that confidence, because Dawson Knox had to go through that same thing. So I love the way the room's built, and you're right. Dawson Knox is able to take that tight end 1 role if Dalton Kincaid goes down. And I would love that Jackson Hawes will be that tight end too, because he is prolific. He wasn't one of my guys, but I did have a late 4th on him, and he was another value.
Yeah, so the roster question I have with Hawes is kind of straying away from the tight end room, sort of, kind of, but it brings a question for me for between Hawes and then how questions with Reggie Gilliam on the roster. So Gilliam was brought back this past season on a contract. I believe it was only a 1-year deal. And he's been their fullback, started out as like a fullback tight end hybrid, plays a ton of teams. The team loves him. And then as the season got further and further towards the end, when it was getting colder out and they wanted to establish the run a bit more, be more physical, you saw Gilliam's snaps start slowly build up and increase as a member of that offense and a factor there. So for me, my idea maybe is that either Hawes, I don't think it would be this year just because they do love Gilliam so much, but in the future, because they love running that 6th tight end or 6th offensive line as an extra tight end, and you already have 2 tight ends that play in Knox and Kincaid, and Knox is locked in at least for this upcoming season because of the contract reworking they did, and he's the best friends with Josh Allen. As the time goes on, that contract gets better and better because just the cap goes up, tight ends get paid more and more. I think that Knox contract's a bit overblown for how expensive people claim it is. But for me, I think looking at who Hawes could push out of the lineup or out of a roster spot isn't one of those top 2 tight ends. But I'm thinking that potentially in the future, if they don't want to spend money to bring Gilliam back, or if they just think they found a suitable replacement for that player, they could run Hawes as more of that move blocking player who contributes on special teams and then not have to peg themselves into repeatedly going back to the Reggie Gilliam well, especially if he doesn't continue to add to their offense, or if they bring in a new offensive coordinator, if Joe Brady ever leaves and he's not in favor with that offensive system. A true fullback, that is.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I don't know how much I can add to that because I almost 100% fully agree, because Reggie Gilliam came back on the 1 year, and I think that was on purpose with what they were targeting in the tight end department. It was no secret that our tight end 3 needed to be a big blocker, losing Matt Collins, and then obviously that's what tight end 3's primary role is in the blocking. So I think Reggie Gilliam steps in for this year, and then we run without a fullback in 2026, and then hope that Jackson Hawes kind of takes in that place.
Yeah, the only hang up I have with that is that they do love Gilliam so much, and he does contribute on special teams, and right. But for me, I'm thinking that if you're going to save, and this team has always had a fullback. I did that roster breakdown 5 years in a row between Patrick DeMarco and Gilliam,
Right.
they've always had a fullback. But for me, I'm thinking if you're trying to, this kind of plays back to the Jordan Hancock, and we'll talk about with our next pick in Dorian Strong, if you want to have more players on defense or have a ton of players that you don't want to lose out on, moving on from the fullback and having your tight end 3 who can do that same similar role and saves a roster spot for you, that might be where you can, cut some fat and save spots and move some of the numbers around to be able to make that work. So that was where my head was at with the Hawes and talking about Reggie Gilliam as potentially a cut candidate because of what Hawes does well as a third tight end.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Honestly, that seems like the strategy before the draft. When we got Jackson Hawes, it seems like the strategy because we chose Jackson Hawes. So I think you're 100% correct.
All right, so moving on to our 6th round pick. First one we have here, 177. So they had 3 picks in 7 goes. So Hancock is at 170, Hawes at 173, and then at the very first pick, around 6, Dorian Strong, the quarterback out of Virginia Tech. Another player, I watched him right before the draft, like the day of, because I originally had him like a 3rd round grade. I ended up dropping it down to like a 4/5 because I do think his athleticism did take a hit. His testing wasn't great, and it showed up on tape where like, you didn't really trust him as like a super athletic man corner. But as someone who has really good zone senses, can play that, is that Buffalo Bills day 3 corner pick where he's Christian Benford, he's Dane Jackson, he's Rashad Wildgoose. He's a bunch of these players that they draft to bring in that are going to fit in only specific schemes and excel in specific schemes, but the Bills scheme is that scheme itself. So I'm a big fan of Dorian Strong, especially for the Bills being the team that drafted him in round 6.
For sure. And I would be curious because even Brandon Beane came out and said that he plays a little slot and nickel as well, which I was a little confused about. I understand that maybe being in the box may be better for him, but he played mainly corner in the boundary. So I'm curious to see if that may be a competition with Cam Lewis to see, trying to figure out Dorian Strong and Cam Lewis in a competition battle. So I'm curious about that. But then I think you're right. I mean, the athletic testing was kind of brutal. Not brutal, but you could kind of tell, and then you could watch tape and it matches. Like the 1-5-7 10-yard split with the poor explosion kind of matches when you can see him trying to play press man or in his zone, kind of getting back in cover 3. But I mean, his ball hawk is super impressive. 5 interceptions the last 2 years. He does have a lot of PBUs as well, so he can get in the system. And Buffalo system is pretty cornerback friendly to have you adjust to. So it would be interesting to see how he plays out. I had Dorian Strong right where you moved him into that early 5th rounder. So 177 was still still kind of a steal. I think I think he has much out of our draft picks. He's probably one of the players who needs to prove himself the most.
Yeah, and so that kind of comes to the roster question I had for Dorian Strong was, we talked about earlier about how Trey White, even if he doesn't win that starting job over Maxwell Harrison, he's probably going to stick around just because contract-wise, he's not the candidate most people have in mind for corner that can get cut because of a camp battle. I think the mentioning of Dorian Strong being maybe a nickel player by Brandon Beane is interesting, but I personally think he's going to be more of an outside corner. They just probably want him to be able to have some flexibility to be able to stick around, especially if you're going to be a backup. And he's a strong special teams player. The person I see him directly battling with is going to be Dane Jackson for a roster spot. I think between the two of those guys, you have players who both have, lower upside athletically, but I think Dorian Strong compares closely to Dane Jackson when it comes to a player, as I kind of talked about, Buffalo Bills style corner who I'm sure could spot start at times, plays zone well, has some ball skills, but you don't really want to rely on them as a consistent starter year in, year out, game in, game out, and can also, like I said, be a special teams contributor. So for me, I think it's Dane Jackson versus Dorian Strong, especially with Dane Jackson's contract being so easily cuttable with how little guaranteed money there is. So for me, do you think that Dorian Strong, is that the 1-on-1 matchup, or is there a potential future where both Strong and Dane Jackson make it, and like Jamarcus Ingram gets cut, who was another like strong special teamer? I don't know. I think Ingram personally is safe for me, but who do you think of those 3 at the bottom of that cornerback depth chart? If there's a spot for 1 or 2 of them, who's your inside track to getting those spots on the roster?
Yeah, I think the one left out would probably be Dane Jackson, especially coming back. We kind of linked in with him coming in. You're right with his contract, and then I'm not sure if Tre'Davious White was always in the system, like when they got Dane Jackson, because it almost sounded like they grabbed Dane Jackson for that veteran who was already in the building. And then maybe they got a phone call with Tre'Davious White, sort of thing. They're like, okay, well, we can't not get Tre'Davious White, sort of thing. So I would say that Dane Jackson would potentially be the odd person out, especially with his play in Carolina. I'm not sure if it was specifically being in Carolina and he's just good in Buffalo's system, but his days in Carolina were not great. So I don't expect him to kind of like snap back like a rubber band and be exactly who he was in Buffalo. So that's where I kind of have that drop off and where I think Dane Jackson would be probably the odd person out, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think for Dane specifically, between those three players, maybe Jamarcus Ingram could be considered this
I
as
do
well,
like,
but
yeah.
I think Dane is the most likely to, if you cut, you can land him back on your practice squad. Whereas Dorian Strong being that draft pick, I think other teams may see that and covet him a little bit more so to grab him there, as well as I think Jamarcus Ingram being a younger player was a stud on special teams for them last year, could also be a guy that could get swiped up by a team post-cut. So I think, especially if you're looking to try to get one of those guys through the waiver wire and onto the practice squad, I think Dane Jackson's your best bet. Great. Moving on to our second to last pick, in round 6, Chase Lunt, the offensive lineman out of UConn, played tackle during his college career. Is 6'8", but has short arms of position, 0th percentile wingspan. Was a tight end up until his last year in high school, where he switched to tackle. Ended up playing tackle all of his time at UConn. My question for you, I'm not the biggest fan of his tape. I'll let you real quick talk about how you feel about the player, but I felt his tape was all right. I'm just always scared off by the super tall tackles who have no length. I hated Luke Tenuta, wasn't a big fan of that guy, and he ended up being a Bills pick. And while Chase Lynn, I think, is a better player than Tenuta, it's a similar situation with what their issues are.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm trying, I'm always in Aaron Cromer, we trust sort of situation, but I'm kind of on the same frame as well. The wingspan is 0 percentile because he is 6'7", 304. So he is that thin framed. And then, being 6'7", people talked about him going to guard, but is he going to be a guard at 6'7", 304? Like, I don't see an anchor. I don't see a great anchor. I don't see that lower body power out of him. I mean, his good quality, I really do like Chase Lund, depending on, if Cromer can figure it out. But, he's great in the run game. He's so fast laterally to where he can get to that second level really quick and hammer home on a linebacker to open up bigger spots in the run game. He, traps really well, moves across the line really well and stuff like that. But as a pass set offensive lineman is where it worries me. So the trenches, yeah, go ahead. So that's how I feel about Chase Lund, and I know you got questions coming.
Yeah, so the roster question I have is the fact that he played tight end up to the last point, you'd think, and I'm thinking that we're kind of going to be on the same page here, that his pathway to making the roster would be as that swing, sixth offensive lineman they utilize as a tight end a lot. But for me, the question comes in is that you had Tyler Grable won that job last year for him. And he ended up getting hurt, which allowed Alec Anderson to take over that position, and he excelled at it. So now you have two guys that are potentially ahead of him and have proven to be good at that position. So I don't know if you keep a third player projected to be that way. Is there any spot you can see him other than playing as that sixth offensive lineman? Do you like him best at guard? Do you think there's a way he can play tackle? I don't think there is. Is there? What do you think he can attack mostly to try to make his spot on this roster?
I think in the offseason it'll be guard 100% because I agree with you when it comes to Alec Anderson and Tyler Grable. I'd much rather, unfortunately, take a loss on a pick 206 if somebody picks him up off the practice squad than to lose Grable or Alec Anderson, especially they know the system well, knows all the play calls, and they do it well, sort of thing, with Grable winning before the injury. And then, you have Ryan Vandemark as well. That's a very good offensive line. It's a true, again, it's both trenches, both sides of the ball. It's true competition. So that's what's going to be fun at spring training and everything is who's going to win those positions. I do think that it'll be tough for Chase Lund to outbeat Grable and Alec Anderson. So it'll be rough, but I do really like Chase Lund. I think he has good to his game. So if another team were to pick him up, he's going to do well in the NFL. it's rough. Our offensive line is good and our depth is good. It's kind of hard to figure out. I understand the pick when it was made, sort of thing, because you can never have enough offensive line, but it will be rough for him to get a spot, in my opinion. But guard would probably be the one.
Yeah, I think the most ideal way for him to have a meaningful career as a Buffalo Bill is landing on the practice squad. When David Edwards leaves, you have Alec Anderson step in for that spot, and then that leaves Tylen Grable as the only real player who can play that 6 offensive lineman, and then he's eventually the successor for maybe Osiris Torrance, or if Alex Anderson leaves after that. Like, you have those two guys eventually progress into starting roles as guards, and then Chase Lunt 3 seasons down the road is your six offensive linemen playing that like swing tight end role or jumbo tight end role. So I think that's his projection wise. I do think if you're going to play him on the line itself, like you'll see in preseason, he'll probably be a guard. But I think that's the only real vision I can see him landing as like a potential future Buffalo Bills 53-man roster player.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree, and I hope that is kind of the path, because that is very prime for us, to be honest with you, to have somebody locked and loaded like Chase Lunt in year 3 just to step in and be ready.
Yes, and especially for that position, which has been so important for this offense, at least since for the past few years, McDermott's been doing that. So it hasn't just been an Alec Anderson thing. Right. Finally, our last pick, the Bills fans got their wide receiver, round 7, pick 240. Caden Prather, wide receiver. Now, was he drafted out of Maryland or out of UVA? Which one did he end his career at?
Maryland.
Okay, so he was out of Maryland. They got their wide receiver from Maryland that that everyone always wanted from the draft. So they got their guy.
It was definitely Caden Prather, right?
100%. So yeah, Caden Prather started his career at UVA, University of Virginia, and ended at Maryland, 7th round pick for the Bills. For me, I think I didn't get around to watching this player. Randall, you'll have to fill us in on how you feel about this player overall and what do you think, if it, steal wise, if it was a player that was worth that pick or someone who you just think, it's got kind of all right selection there in the end of the 7th round.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say that there weren't other available wide receivers that at that point that we could have gotten, but Caden Prather's game is actually really, really interesting, and I think he does work. The pick makes sense in how he operates and what we lost in the offseason with Matt Collins. But, a 6'3", 204 pounds, so a little bit thinner frame. He ran a 4.46 40, so he does have that quickness. But his explosion and his 10-yard split weren't great, and you can see that on tape. His first step is not the greatest, but he does come with good hand fighting for press man, so he can play that outside X every time sort of thing. So he can play that outside X. He's got great hands. He's got late hands. His vertical was only 30 inches, so his contested catch is more or less won by ball tracking, and he does a very good at ball tracking and have those late hands. But he only had 1 drop this year. He fixed it from 5 drops the year before, so he went from about 15% drop rate down to a 2% drop rate. So he looked really good this year. He has consistently, he typically will always get 45 yards. He won't have that 1 catch 10-yard game. It'll always be kind of 40 and above. Had a couple 100-yard games. But when it comes down to it, the only thing that I kind of like him to do is he does weigh, I think, 201 or 202, 204. I would like to see him maybe gain like 4 or 5 pounds of muscle for him to be able to break through at the stem of the route to make sure he doesn't lose on that physicality, especially with his height. So he's a work in progress, but there's that good percentage that he could most certainly work out. He was next to Ty Felton, and they had a good 1-2 combo, which we can do with our wide receivers that also play outside, like Ty Felton, and inside in Elijah Moore and Joshua Palmer. They do that. So trip sets would be interesting with them to see if he makes that wide receiver 5 role. I wouldn't be surprised if we do run 5 or possibly 6 wide receivers. We'll see how Brandon Beane wants to make that work. But I think he just has a good percentage to work out, especially for a 7th round pick, especially at 240.
Yeah, so I think for the roster question is, obviously you drafted Prather this year. You invested a pick in him. It was a 7th round pick, nothing super expensive. For me, after signing of Elijah Moore, you have Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Joshua Palmer. Those are 5 players right there. Potentially, there's Curtis Samuel you can potentially move on from. But I think if they're going to run 6 wide receivers, it comes down to a competition of, they brought in Laviska Shenault. You have holdovers like Tyrell Shavers, KJ Hamler, Jalen Virgil, and now you have Caden Prather. Is there something that he can do to set himself above some of the other players? I know Virgil and Shavers got some looks and some run last year, but they've been consistently like practice squad players. So is there something that puts him above those players as to maybe be a special teamer or someone who can fight his way onto being that wide receiver 6 spot?
Yeah, I mean, first I would be curious to see how Brandon Beane is going to operate in the kick return, taking it now to the 35-yard line. So that kick return will probably be, 90% of the kick return. So that puts it, and you have to put 2 on there as well, 2 on the field for those kick returns. So that'll be interesting to see if that 6 wide receiver is part of that special teams. I personally think that Caden Prather is better. If we were to do the pecking order, is Laviska Shenault would be probably 2, and then Shavers 3, Virgil 4. I would actually, at this moment, I like Caden Prather's game enough to put him ahead of all those 3. He kind of just has to show his game. He does have lateral twitch. He does have a good vertical threat. So right now, if we were to run 6 wide receivers, I do have him in that lead.
All right, cool. Yeah, I was curious because he was a 7th-round pick. Not many people knew a ton about him. There was a bunch of fanfare about him, but with how people were talking about, especially before the Elijah Moore signing, that like, okay, is Shavers, is Virgil, one of those guys going to step up? Well, now you have potential that there's going to be a guy who was a rookie that makes that spot and fights off those other practice squad players, and then you're still having a strong practice squad group of wide receivers there that can come in and be effective if there's injuries along the way. So that is the 2025 Buffalo Bills draft class. Like we said earlier, I'm pretty happy with it. I think that there was a lot of picks that they landed that was above value, and a lot of the guys that I loved coming out of this class and I thought I was relatively higher on that ended up falling to them, and including like Hairston, Hancock, Hawes, Strong was another long-listed player, Landon Jackson I was head over heels for. So there's a ton of players that they drafted that I love and that can both affect or impact their team now and as we talked about even into the future. So this was fun. I had a good time talking about it. I think the roster is set up in a way that I think a lot of these players are going to be impact players moving forward, not just this season. And I think we've seen that in this conversation we've had today. So thank you for joining me, Randall. If you want to plug all your stuff here at the end, so we can get to know where your work is and how we can most efficiently follow you.
Most definitely. I appreciate you having me on, by the way. At Randall Slifer, right down there, that you can find me at Twitter and Blue Sky. I try and respond to everybody. I have that time of day sort of thing, but talk ball, everything along those lines, and I'll try to do videos on Twitter and Blue Sky as well. And then I do my podcasting with Draft Professors, with Owen, and 60 other folk that are involved with that, which we love, and we're getting our summer scout going. And then I also write for Team NBS Media, and I'm a part of their NFL Draft Central with Bill Carroll, Jeff Barnes, and Greg Rector, which I love so much. And then I write Arkansas Razorback, Buffalo Bills, and some TV, movies, whole 9 yards. Whatever comes in my brain, I can put it on that website.
Awesome, yeah. I've checked out some of the stuff on the Team NBS, and it was good stuff. And I think especially with some of these Arkansas players that are coming out next year for the draft, I'll be tuned in a little bit more so with your write-ups there just to be able to keep my finger on the pulse. But thank you for coming on, Randall. I had a great time with this conversation. This is better than I even could have expected it to go. I'm still a little stuffed up and nasally. This hopefully by the time I record next, I think I'm recording Wednesday with the Draft Professors, I should be a little bit better, if not fully healed back up. But yeah, we got through it today. We got finished our tea, kept the coughing down to a minimum, and now I'm going to go downstairs and just go to sleep for 12 hours.
There you go. That's the only way to heal.
Yeah, right. All right, but so for me and Randall, thank you guys for joining us on the Weekly Huddle YouTube channel. Go ahead and like, subscribe, leave comments. The outshowing for when Newt came on and we talked about the Packers podcast or draft class on that podcast this past week was awesome. It's been one of the best viewed videos I've had in a while. So thank you for any of the Packers fans that stopped in to watch that, and hopefully this one can replicate that. Bills Mafia has some competition. But yeah, for us over here, thank you guys and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.